Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is my co-host, the Mid-South Warrior, Mark Tipton.
The Mid-South Warrior. Thank you so much. Referring to me, warrior might be a stretch of the imagination. I'm about as harmless as you get.
This is radio. He's actually has face paint on, people.
Oh, yeah, I've got tassels and everything.
Yep.
Or at least I pretend to be a tough guy on the internet. How's that? That goes around, I hear.
Especially in the professional wrestling business.
Absolutely. I do appreciate the name, the Mid-South Warrior. I like that. Certainly, in the terminology of professional wrestling, the Mid-South in this area, I'm proud to have been a fan of this wrestling in this area, and it's part of the history of professional wrestling. And the Warrior, for those of you who listen, the name often references the subject matter of that edition of the 30-Minute Midas Touch podcast, and this week is no exception, because this week we want to discuss the career of one of the more, I'll say, controversial figures in the history of professional wrestling, and that was the gentleman his name was Jim Hellwig, although he did legally change his name to Warrior at one point, and I'm sure we'll discuss that, but he's most popularly known as the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah, and what kind of prompted this subject was, I've been watching the A&E biographies, like a lot of people have. And, when I read the list of those that were doing, when the Ultimate Warrior came up, I was kind of like, that's the one I'm least interested in, But after watching it, it was very enthralling with some of the stories they told and some of the behind the scenes to do with the Ultimate Warrior. So I felt that we can definitely talk 30 minutes on any subject when it pertains to professional wrestling here. I thought the Ultimate Warrior would be an excellent place to start.
Well, certainly. And just to kind of get prepared for this, I went back and watched the WWE version documentary that they did shortly after he passed, and part of the Hall of Fame week, and kind of a retrospective on his career, which I did appreciate and enjoyed a lot, and watched back the WrestleMania 6 match, which I would consider his career highlight, I suppose would really be fair to say, along with the Intercontinental title victory against the Honky Tonk Man. Those were two very big matches in his career. But I suppose we should start at the beginning, so to speak.
Absolutely.
He pointed out that he wasn't someone who really had a long-term goal of getting into professional wrestling. In this documentary, he mentioned that he was into bodybuilding. He was living in the Georgia area, apparently.
Yeah, what had happened was he actually was, and this is from the A&E biography, was that he grew up without a father, right?
Yes.
And he lived on the wrong side of the tracks, and he was that kind of kid, and like the entire time, he was never popular. He was never, the go-to person for anything. So he always felt left out, and had that as kind of his life. So his thing was, I'm gonna be famous. I'm gonna be so big at something that when I come back to this town, everyone's gonna know who I am, and everyone's going to regret, not giving me the time of day or whatever the case may be. And he, like I said, he just found his way into professional wrestling that way after trying the bodybuilding thing. So it's like, and I said this before we went on the air as we're just kind of discussing what's going on is, there's a saying in wrestling that goes, those who get it do, and those who don't never will, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think the Ultimate Warrior really ever got professional wrestling. And the fact that he was as successful as he was, in spite of that, that's a huge thing. But, to me, he was like the Kardashians of professional wrestling. The fact that he didn't care anything about professional wrestling or the sanctity of it or anything like that, but he only cared about himself and Jim Hillwood's eventual success in some form or fashion.
All right. And your point about that kind of struck me because that's something that I don't know if it's unique to professional wrestling, but it seems to be to me. Maybe it's my perspective. I have, and I'm going to draw a parallel here that you may disagree with. You have heard me on this podcast criticize Goldberg. Um, he is someone who you said someone who didn't quite understand the business but was successful in it, and when you said that, Goldberg came to my mind. And I have to admit, I shouldn't necessarily criticize Goldberg because the business kind of created Goldberg. And could that same be said of the Ultimate Warrior?
Yeah, absolutely. Like they're all products of their environment. Goldberg especially. He says himself he was so green in the business that he didn't know who to listen to, and there was guys giving him advice from all different directions, and he didn't know who to listen to, and he made some mistakes and dealing with people and whatever. Obviously he had a run with Jericho and several other people. So I mean, it wasn't like I said, it was just a product of his environment. If he would have had someone that was truly looking out for him and not, some ulterior motive is probably the case,
Yes.
then he probably would have been much better served.
Well, it does seem fair to say that both of these examples I'm referencing, they're guys who people saw an opportunity to make money with, and both of them did.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like the Ultimate Warrior, when he was huge. Like, I mean, and I don't mean popularity. I mean like physically.
Yes.
I mean, he was especially when he first got started with the Power Team USA stuff.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And him and
Yeah,
Sting.
I looked at some of those photos.
I mean, he was immensely jacked. You know what I mean? They looked the part.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like if those guys walked into a room, you go, shit, there's somebody.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I don't know what they are or who they are, but there's somebody, right? So I mean that's always a plus in professional wrestling, and you hope that it leads to people having a love and understanding and aptitude for professional wrestling. But sometimes, unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah, and it stuck out to me when you mentioned about dealing with who to listen to. Ultimate Warrior did mention in one of his interviews that I watched back that when he would come back through the curtain, there were guys back there who offered him advice and tell him, hey, you can't do this and you can't do that. And he would, he said he ignored most of it because the only person that didn't say things like that was Vince. And he thought that, hey, if Vince is happy with what I'm doing. And so, but there were people who were trying to kind of didn't have his best interest at heart. Let me kind of get us back on the rise of the Ultimate Warrior, so to speak, because he did mention he found himself in California at Gold's Gym. And while there, he was introduced to a guy, kind of met somebody, said, hey.
I believe it was Red Bastien.
There you go. Thank you. And one thing led to another. And he ended up being part of, I don't want to say a wrestling camp. The way he did, his description of it sounded like it was very limited wrestling training. But it was at this point that he met Steve Borden, as we know as Sting.
Yeah. Yeah, they were part of this Power Team USA thing, and like they apparently they decided, well, hey, you know what? Red Bastien, I think thinks you guys could make a living in professional wrestling. So they sent out apparently all these promo kits to different promoters, and I think Memphis was the first one to answer, and they said, well, we're interested in those two guys, and those two guys just happen to be the Ultimate Warrior and Sting.
Right.
Back then I think they were Rock and Flash, or
yeah, I'd forgotten the others now. I knew Warrior was referred to as Rock, but Sting's name I had forgotten.
Well, I don't know if the Rock and Flash thing may have came after they were named the Blade Runners, and after they started using the makeup and stuff like that. So they may have just been Steve and Jim in the beginning. I don't really remember, but they were just so green, and you just watch their matches and like. You can tell how difficult it is. Like, I always tell people, you don't know how someone is till you lock up with them. You know what I mean? Like, there's been guys that I thought were not very good, and I locked up with them, and they were good. You know what I mean? Just the opposite. I thought some of the guys were really good, and I locked up with them, and I soon realized they're not that good. So but you can see how green and how hard they were to move, and they just didn't understand the physiology or the spacing of professional wrestling. They're constantly in the wrong spot.
Well, very quickly, that point you just made is something that I've observed from I was because I view everything from outside the ring.
Yeah.
I want to bring it this way. Sometimes I feel as though people who and you kind of mentioned this way about people who get it, and who don't never do. Sometimes I think the individuals who get it sometimes don't appreciate how odd it is, because to me, professional wrestling requires a totally different mindset, a way to look at things, and not everybody understands that, and some never get it at all. And I think that people that do get it don't always appreciate how hard it is to think that way.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. I tell guys all the time, like especially when it comes to just wrestling training in general, we're teaching you to do things with your body that your mind has been telling you not to do
Exactly.
your entire life. That's part of it. But what you're talking about is the psychology of professional wrestling, and just that mindset that this is a good guy. This is a bad guy. Bad guys do this. Good guys do this. Good guys don't ever do this. Bad guys don't ever do that. You see what I'm saying? Like, a lot of people have trouble with those kind of concepts, or like the whys and hows, as I say. And like, some guys just never put that stuff together. I mean, we all are green at some point. We all don't know at some point. And that was kind of my fault. Was when I first started, I thought I knew professional wrestling. Man, I thought I knew it, because I've been a fan my whole life, and I thought I had this shit figured out. And I was soon to realize how little I knew about the sport that I'd loved so much all my life. Because there were certain things that people told me that was just blew my mind. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense now. But it never occurred to me.
Well, yeah, I've often heard people in a heated way say, "Do you even watch wrestling?" or criticize guys that don't understand it. And I was like, "Well, he may watch it, but he may not understand it. Maybe he needed someone to translate it, for this guy." And it frustrates me when I hear that. But I understand it's just miscommunication.
Yeah, and that's true too. Because like I've said this before. My oldest son he plays piano. You know what I mean? So like, he can sit down to a piano or look at a piano, and he can hear Beethoven and Bach and all that kind of stuff, and he can sit down and play it, right? I look at a piano and I see a wooden box. You know what I mean?
Well, that mystifies me. How people do have those talents.
Yeah, and that's why I feel my talents in professional wrestling, because I always say, like, at the I feel like Neo at the end of the Matrix. When he's seeing the world in code. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I see professional wrestling. I can see through the quote unquote reality, and see what's really going on and how to break it down, things like that. So, and that's something that obviously the Ultimate Warrior has been lacking in.
Well, yeah, and to bring it back to Warrior, which is I kind of got us off on a tangent there, but what I'd like to say is just kind of evidence of that is in one of the interviews I watched. I guess it was on the WWE one, that when Jerry Jarrett, almost messed up. Jerry Jarrett brought in Sting and Warrior to the Memphis area, that he kind of teamed them with Dutch Mantel. And because Dutch Mantel was in effect a coach for them, because these were two guys with almost no experience at all. And Dutch Mantel was interviewed and mentioned how green they were, how inexperienced they were. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, Dutch is a good person to do that with, because he has a track record of doing that. So, given the Blade Runners to him was a smart decision. I don't know how it would have worked long term, but I always found it funny. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard the story of how they actually got fired from Memphis. Have you ever heard that? So Lawler told the story. Lawler told the story. I believe it was on the Self Destruction, the Ultimate Warrior DVD. Maybe that's where I heard it. But anyways, he tells the story basically like he was wrestling Warrior one night in some little town, and like he held Lawler's feet, like he's gonna do like kick him in the gut or something like that. You know what I mean? Like Lawler's laying on the mat and he's got him by the feet, right? Well, instead of kicking him in the gut or whatever, Warrior jumps up in the air and like puts his legs in between Lawler's legs, but has them spread out.
Oh.
So like Lawler got wishboned,
Mm.
and like he had to be like carted off, I think, and like it was actually had to be helped to the back. Like I think they may have just scratched the match or he rolled him up or something.
Oh.
But like he had to be carted off, and he said they weren't in Memphis long after that.
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, the visual was something similar to something where you see Jeff Hardy do from time to time, but obviously not to the degree I
Yeah,
suspect it happened in this instance. I guess very quickly, I notice I want to move things along here a little bit. After they left Memphis, they did spend some time, I understand, with Bill Watts in the Mid-South.
Mhm.
And then at that point, it seems that he and Sting parted ways, apparently. And Warrior went to World Class and became the Dingo Warrior. Is that roughly correct?
And they covered this too. Is basically, they were together as a tag team, and like there was some situation going on where I think Warrior was trying to hold out for more money or something like that from Bill Watts, which is, is a bad road anyway. I don't think Bill Watts is going to blink in the least for anyone wanting more money if he wants you to stay home. So, anyways, Warrior decided to basically no call, no show his bookings.
Oh,
Right, and but Sting, being the stand-up guy he is, he didn't want to do that, so he made all the dates.
okay.
And then when he did that, Warrior got pissed off because he felt like Sting screwed him.
He saw that as a betrayal.
He saw that as a betrayal, and then there was the split, and there he was on his way to Dallas.
In any event, he did make his way there, and we saw the Dingo Warrior, which I suppose people saw as a poor man's ultimate warrior, so to speak, kind of character, who did have some success there, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the way they put it over was that he was really hot, and people were really, I don't remember that. I mean, I go back and watch some of that stuff, and it's kind of like, yeah, he has a look, and yeah, it's interesting, but at the same time, you think about, of all the territories there are, right? I almost think World Class would be the most difficult to get over something like the Ultimate Warrior / Dingo Warrior. Because it was so based in reality with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds and all these, just amazing workers. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And sure, there was gimmicks like the missing link and things like that. But, to me, for some reason, that just seemed too cartoony.
All right.
For Dallas, which led to...
Aha! But it did get the attention of the folks in New York, as they refer to it.
Well, let me go back you reminded me of something, too. The Dingo Warrior was billed from New York because Gary Hart was his manager, right?
Yes.
So he was billed from New York, but he was the Dingo Warrior, which is Australian.
Right.
Right? And just none of it made sense whatsoever.
Well, hey, bad creative happens from time to time, I suppose. We could say that.
It's just like someone else. It's just a weird word too. Like, why would you call yourself
the
Dingo
Warrior? Yeah.
Like, even as a kid, I remember going, "That kind of sounds like Ding-a-ling."
Yeah. Well,
or it reminds me of.
Whatever it was enough to get the attention of someone in New York, and he found his way to the WWE. He did mention, and I did appreciate, I also went back and watched his Hall of Fame speech. I appreciated he specifically thanked people who helped him when he arrived there. And he called out several people. The guy he had his first television match with, who I had no recollection of. But he did that. He mentioned several people, and I thought that was outstanding. But he certainly made his way up the ranks very quickly in WWE when he arrived. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but at the same time, you have to understand, that's the way you rode the business. Does that make sense? Like, you rode the wave of whatever was going on.
Okay.
Like, if you look at the hottest things in wrestling or anything that had any kind of momentum like that, they all went very quick. Like, The Rock debuted at Survivor Series 96, and by 99, he's already main evented 2 WrestleManias. You understand? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. Same thing with Steve Austin. I mean, same thing. King of the Ring, 96, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then by 98, he's the hottest thing in the business.
Right.
You know what I mean?
The Austin era.
Yeah. So, Warrior, it looks very quick today because now we have guys that are they've been there 10, 12, 15 years and never had any success whatsoever, and they have to get fired and then rehired for some reason for them to become main event worthy. But that used to be the thing. Like you put them out there, and if they got over, okay, they're over. Let's do something with it now.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? Sink or swim kind of thing.
Okay.
But now it's not that way. It's like if they don't want you to get over, then
They can arrange things.
yeah they'll put the kibosh on it.
Well, I suppose, I believe I mentioned this earlier. This was SummerSlam 88, a landmark in his career. We had the Honky Tonk Man, who had a long, successful run with the Intercontinental title. And as I recall, he was doing an open challenge, I believe, or something of that nature.
Yeah, I believe it was he had an opponent, but they said he got injured. I think it was.
Okay.
Someone had got injured and left that spot open. So it doesn't matter who it is. Get them on out here. I'll beat them no matter what.
Right.
You know?
I'm the greatest of all time.
I'm the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. And then the Ultimate Warrior's music hit, and I was watching live, when this happened. And I, as a kid, I mean, this is '88, SummerSlam '88, so I'd have been 7 years old. Just for people out there, by the way, I was a huge Ultimate Warrior fan when I was a kid. I loved all the good guys and hated all the heels, right? So I loved everyone with face paint, especially. So I loved the Road Warriors and Ultimate Warrior and Sting and guys like that. So I was a huge fan. So when he came out, I lost my shit. Like that.
Well, certainly.
That was a huge moment, and it still holds up to this day. Like it's just a really good moment in wrestling, and the fact that they were smart enough to go, hey, this needs to happen in 30 seconds.
Yes.
This doesn't need to be a 10-minute match where he eventually gets the win.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Would it be fair to say that wouldn't play to his strengths in any event?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, that's why we, we're going to talk about here in a minute too about the WrestleMania 6 match, but like up until that point, like I don't ever remember him having, an extremely long match. Like everything was shortened for him, and that's being smart. That a lot of people think that's not like, oh, he should be able to go 60 minutes. No, not everybody can.
No.
That's a rare quality in professional wrestling. So like if there's guys that all they can do is 10 minutes worth of stuff, then just give them 10 minutes worth of stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? And let them get over that way. So the fact that it was 30 seconds or less, I'm not sure exactly how long it was.
It was not long.
It wasn't long. I'm not sure about the time, but it was definitely a huge moment.
Right, and it was all about that capturing that excitement of him running to the ring and just the place coming unglued and Honky doesn't get enough credit because like he's just such a great Southern heel. Yes,
you know what I mean. And like I know a lot of guys talk about like Jake Snake said he was a lazy worker and he didn't want to do this and do that, but he was over and he had heat. And like he understood the basic concepts of that kind of thing, like the way he's bumping and feeding and selling and that entire 30, 40 seconds, he made that match. If he would have went out there and sandbagged it, or sold like a dead fish, it wouldn't have had the same reaction. But the fact that he was upset about, oh shit, I got to wrestle the Ultimate Warrior, and then here he comes, ball of fire.
Right, and then you just in effect made this guy a star. If star wasn't already on the rise. And you did mention, well, let's fast forward here. We've mentioned, and I've mentioned it, WrestleMania 6. I have to admit, as a fan, you mentioned your fandom of the Warrior. This was a match. I was absolutely in the Warrior camp on this. And
were you?
Because
yeah.
I was absolutely in the Warrior camp. And to me, and it's one I've mentioned how I like the build up when there were 4 pay-per-views for years.
Yeah.
The ultimate challenge and the lead up to this WrestleMania. Yeah. Would you like to talk about that and the way it delivered at WrestleMania?
I mean, it's all about creating those conflicts, and WWE had a kind of a trend there for a little bit where every 6 years they had a baby main event at Mania. So they had 6 was obviously the Warrior Hogan, and then 12 was Iron Man, Bret and Shawn, and then 18. Which one was it? 18 had one too, I think, or maybe it was. Anyway, one in and around there had another baby main event, but so the build up, like you said, with these 4 big pay-per-views, of course, that's why I always love the Royal Rumble because it's always like, well, here's 30 guys in the ring. we're going to get a matchup we haven't seen before, or some kind of business we haven't seen before, and that's kind of what happened. Warrior and Hogan kind of had a run in, and that's kind of where it all began, right?
Right.
So, and then they did things back and forth where they tagged up, but then Warrior accidentally clotheslined Hogan, and it just kind of built that whole aura around the thing, like the immovable force. What is it?
The irresistible force and the immovable object.
Yes.
Gorilla Monsoon told me that.
Absolutely, and that was a focal point of that whole program.
And I will say, I mentioned, as I look back on it, I think the build up to that match for me, they say the journey is sometimes greater than the destination.
Yeah.
I still remember so finally the build up and the anticipation of that match. To me, it almost overshadowed the match itself. But I would like to let you just talk about the match itself.
Yeah, the match itself. I love the match itself. Like literally, like you said, I was in the Warrior camp on this one. I actually, had a bet with somebody. I think when I was, I had a bet during this pay-per-view with another kid about. He said Hogan was going to win. I said the Warrior was going to win, and we bet like $5 or something like that. So. I was strongly in the Warrior camp, but like this match, like even to this day, like I go back and watch it, and to me it still holds up because is it the prettiest thing? You know what I'm saying? Like is it Briscoe versus Terry Funk?
Well, it's not a catch-as-catch-can classic.
No, not at all. But like the story is there.
Yes. The
drama's there, and just they were so immensely popular at that time. When you got 60, 70,000 people that are literally they're all invested in this match. It's not like half of them are just Hogan and half of them are just Warrior. They're all invested in the entire culmination of whatever happens in this.
Right. Every shoulder tackle was a big deal.
Yeah, every tackle, every time you threw somebody.
The test of strength.
And for years I was like, I couldn't believe that they had this match because that was the best Ultimate Warrior match we'd ever seen and since. Right. And like I couldn't understand, man, how did they do that, or how did Hogan do that? And then I read something, or I heard it that actually Pat Patterson put it all together.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And they went to somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks and went over it step by step, and he polished it up until it was that. And that's a pretty good masterpiece in my opinion.
Well, would it be fair to say that the actions in the match kind of emphasized the strengths of the two guys involved?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what I'm talking about. Like I tell guys all the time, you don't have to be able to do everything, right? But what you do, you must do well, right? And I think everything they did in this, they did well for what they were doing. You understand? Like I said, we're not talking about Ricky Steamboat arm drags.
Right.
We're talking about two bulls colliding for a tackle, or the clotheslines, or stuff like that, and just the drama of Hogan hitting the leg drop. You know, and they both. Hogan had the Hulk up, and Warrior had shaking the ropes. So we had both those elements that everyone was like, "Oh shit, here it is." You know what I mean? So it really was a good, in my opinion, it was the best Warrior match, and it's actually one of my favorite Mania matches.
All right, and I know our time is drawing near, so we need to very quickly run through some unpleasant things. Now, Warrior, we mentioned about his personality, or however you want to say it. He had serious falling out with the WWE.
Yeah, I mean, he just, like I said, he was just always about himself and, money and whatever it may be. And, like, that's what he did. He held Vince up for money.
Right.
And, he was supposed to do a SummerSlam tag match, and I think he asked for $500,000.
Right.
To do the match.
That was the number I heard.
Yeah, and so, like, of course, Vince had to pay it because, promoter thing is you give the people what you promote. Right, so he was backed into a fucking corner, so he gave him the money, but he immediately fired him afterwards.
Right.
But once you get $500,000, it doesn't matter if you get fired. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was just him, like I said, being selfish, and
it struck me that ego was heavily involved in this conflict.
Very, very much so. I mean, like, and that. As great as it was when Warrior won the title at WrestleMania 6, it didn't go where it needed to go after that. You understand? Like, and this is where fans become, fickle. Because obviously it was a hot moment, and everyone
Right.
loved it, blah blah blah. But then it doesn't go anywhere, and no one really cares. It's kind of like when, I, okay, so when Damian Sandow was doing the stuntman thing for Miz, remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But it got over, and the people got behind it.
Well, yeah, they
Right.
enjoyed it.
They enjoyed it, and they got behind it, and then they wanted him to turn babyface and attack the Miz, right? Well, he did that, and then after they did, they're like, okay, cool, and then they didn't give a two shits about it, the rest of it.
No.
You know what I mean? So like, and unfortunately, that's just a reality of our business. Sometimes that happens, and you have to know how to roll with the punches.
Would it be fair to say that Mr. Hillwig was not ready to deal with the success he had at WrestleMania 6?
Well, just being a top guy in any
Right.
promotion, I mean, that's a huge weight on your shoulders, and you have to know how to do it correctly. You know what I mean? So I don't know if he had the acumen
Or the experience.
or the experience to really truly be in that role, but he was given the best possible scenario to do it. I mean, the Hulk Hogan put him over
Right.
1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring
At
at WrestleMania.
WrestleMania.
So I mean, and you can say, well, they didn't have a program for him and they didn't do that. No, I don't think it was anything like that. It just didn't compute. Like it wasn't Hogan. You know what I mean?
Right. And this dispute between he and the WWE went on and on. It involved litigation at one point. There was issue about the trademarking of Warrior. He actually legally changed his name to Warrior. I know it's part so he could still call himself that.
That's what I'm saying. He's kind of a Kardashian in the sense because he was really trying to create a brand before that was even a thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like he was trying to hone in his brand to whatever. Maybe he tried to make it a comic book hero and an actual superhero and from parts unknown and all that kind of
Right.
thing. And it just without wrestling, it really just didn't make sense.
And let me get to what I consider the positive part. I think we're over time already, but what was all this negativity and ego and pride and all the things that go into making bad situations worse, in my opinion. This had all of those things, but we did see that at WrestleMania 30 weekend, he and I want to credit Paul Levesque, Triple H, for this. He was credited as being kind of soothing the issues between the two sides and bringing it back together, and he came back and really. I felt like as I watched this, it was a lot about letting go of all the things that had gone on. Is that fair to say at WrestleMania 30?
I mean, I wish it was that, rosy. I wish it was that optimistic, but I really think it was just a money grab kind of thing
Okay.
for the WWE side because I really believe.
Oh, well, yeah, for their side, certainly.
I really feel that the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior DVD was a true depiction of what they experienced with the Ultimate Warrior,
Right.
and how they actually felt. And I remember Warrior saying that he was really pissed off about Triple H saying he was the most unprofessional guy he had ever worked with.
Right. It was a hit piece.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was no doubt about it. But were they lying at any point in it? That's the thing. I think they were telling 100% the truth. He may not have liked, the truths,
Right.
but like they were still truths. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and I will let me play his defense here. He did say, how many other guys have we seen the self-destruction of DVDs dedicated to? Because we could say the same thing. Even Mr. WrestleMania, Shawn Michaels, at one point in his career
Yeah.
was not the best person to deal with.
No.
And he would admit that himself, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think actually what it was they wanted to do a retro piece on him,
Mm-hmm.
and like they approached him by doing that, and he turned them down. Basically said, "Fuck you, no, I'm not doing it." And they're like, "Okay, well, we'll do this then."
and I suppose that may have been part of his lack of understanding of the business.
Mm-hmm.
If he had a better grasp of the business, maybe things would have been handled differently. To me, it seems like a bad situation that was made worse and really didn't need to get as bad as it did.
Right.
And unfortunately, I guess to sort of put a cap on this, that he had what I thought was a pretty solid Hall of Fame speech. Appeared at WrestleMania, gave another speech in Raw the following Monday night, which a lot of people really enjoyed and appreciated, just kind of saying, hey, here's where I am, and kind of appreciation. And then we saw less than 24 hours later, he suffered a heart attack and lost his life.
Yeah, and the really kicker about this is that promo on Raw because he talks about how no matter what happens, the Ultimate Warrior character is going
Right.
to run forever. You know what I mean? And that's so poetic and so surreal at the same time. With what happened like 24 hours later, and apparently the Hellwig men in history of his family didn't live long lives. Like his father died young, his uncle
Okay.
died young, stuff like that. So, it may have been compounded with the fact of his steroid use and whatever extracurricular activities he may have been involved in. So, a lot of that probably lent to that, but it's definitely a lasting memory. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's what we talk about. You want them to go home talking about you, right? Well,
Right.
that's a hell of a go home spot right there.
Absolutely. I guess we've talked about the concept of missed opportunities, and as I look back and I see what I saw was kind of a soothing of the the situation. I really feel like as successful as he was, we as wrestling fans missed out on opportunity for a lot more great moments because of personality conflicts and failings and human
Just
frailty.
yeah, just an odd person. You know what I mean? That's the best way to describe it. Like, I just don't think he felt comfortable in that world ever. You know what I mean? And it I think he had social awkwardness. I think there was a lot of different things. There's one story where he was at an airport and a kid asked him for an autograph, and he just blew a gasket on the kid. And then apparently, like some of the boys were there, but also the kid that he went off on. Apparently, their parents knew Vince and were friends with Vince or were some kind of sponsor, some kind of important prospect of Vince. And like he actually had Warrior film. They filmed Warrior filming an apology to this kid because they were trying to do this, and they showed the behind the scenes thing of this of where he's like, he's trying to explain like I didn't really do it and blah blah. And you see him in that angst of that situation, and Vince going, "It's a work, just work it." You understand?
Right.
Like this is just for them. No one else is going to see this. That kind of thing. And it was interesting to see him be that way, behind the camera.
Okay. Well, I know we're over time.
We are over time. We're not at 40 minutes. I don't think we'll ever hit 40 minutes.
Okay.
Because we are the 30-minute Midas Touch. But we'll never be exactly on 30 either. But for myself, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and for my co-host, the Mid-South Warrior, Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.